This is just another reason why social justice warriors are so out of step with the way Americans think. They just don't think like what's in our DNA. What's in our DNA is not reparations. What's in our DNA is doing the right thing. But never do we pass the sins of the father onto the son. If my father racks up debt, I don't have to pay for it. I didn't rack up that debt. Unless I signed, then it's passed on to me. But what my father did is what my father did. And here is yet another example. Moms and dads, is this the kind of country you want your children to inherit? One to where you make a mistake and they have to pay for it? Not me.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's so. I had nothing to do with it, and I'm having an announcement. I had nothing to do with slavery. 0%.
I had nothing to do with. Mm-hmm. I had nothing to do with Jim Crow laws either.
No, didn't have anything to do with it. So, I mean, I understand why, if you are a descendant, you could look back at your history and say that was a huge problem, and we all obviously recognize it was a terrible, terrible thing, as you'll be pointing out in the museum in just a couple of weeks. But that does not mean that I get punished for it. I don't get punished for things that I didn't do. That's what America is built on, that, right? You're supposed to be able to be responsible for your own actions, not actions for people that, by the way, not only was I not around for, but never met, were long dead before I was even born. And I didn't have any, like, my descendants weren't slave owners. Like, only, what was it? About a third of Southerners, white Southerners, were slave owners. I mean, it was an expensive thing, I would imagine, and, mainly relegated to those who were well off and also believed in slavery. But about a third, so you're talking about 2/3 of white Southerners would be have their descendants taxed for something they didn't even do. Not to mention, it was a divisive issue, right? There were a lot of people who were white and in the South who thought slavery was horrible, just like every issue today is divided. We had people who were the founders who fought against it. I mean, did the descendants of Benjamin Franklin, an abolitionist, did they pay reparations to someone who may or may not have been a descendant of slaves? There's no way to manage this system.
Let me ask you this. What would be the purpose? And they say it's justice, but it's not.
No.
Social justice is not justice. It doesn't exist. So they say this is social justice, but really, let's look at the motivation. Let's say right now we reversed Roe versus Wade, and 100 years from now, you would say, well, I want everybody to pay for reparations because my great-great-grandmother was advised by Planned Parenthood that she could get an abortion. And so I want you to pay for those reparations for all of those 50 or 60 million children that have been killed since Roe versus Wade. Now, what would be your intent there? Really, what would your intent be? I would imagine that if you were doing it closer to the actual event, that you could make the case, well, that was to financially cripple this organization to make sure that they were put out of business. I contend that's the same idea here. It's to add to an already $22 trillion debt, to do something that makes absolutely no sense. There is no justice in this. And wait, we're going to what? We're going to pay money that we don't have. We will have to borrow it to do what? I contend this is to do nothing other than to cripple our government, to cripple the United States of America.
And I think
that's what this is about.
And when you really look at how they would do it, there's no constitutional way to tax only white people. Like, I mean, and that's good. There shouldn't be a constitutional way to tax only one specific race. That's not something you can even do. It's this idea that, of course, there's no way to actually correctly trace the lineage of every single person to make this right. So they'll broaden it. And what they want to do is say, okay, well, we're going to tax white people and give it to black people is where it kind of gets summarized to. But even that's blatantly unconstitutional, just like it would be unconstitutional to tax black people to give it to white people. Because you know what? There are plenty of times where people who were incredible racists would have argued that was just. So go beyond that. How would this actually play out? Let's just put it in, not in this idea of whether it's right or wrong. Put it in the idea of actually designing a policy. There's no constitutional way to do it the way it's being discussed. What it would wind up being is an excuse to take money from people who were supposedly too rich and benefited too much off of this evil system and give it to people who are poor, who've been hurt by this system. So what you'd wind up doing is having middle class and upper middle class black people paying higher taxes to give it to people who probably underprivileged, quote unquote, white people who wound up becoming the beneficiary. It would wind up being just a generic argument to redistribute wealth all over again. And what a surprise that one of these topics and one of these big pushes by the left comes back to that fundamental principle once again.